Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first lecture, held in conjunction with the exhibition Sonia Delaunay Living Art, which is currently on view in our beautiful galleries just down the street at 18 West 86th Street. I encourage you all to attend, and attend more than once. I'm Laura Macrulis, research curator here at the Bard Graduate Center. And I want to tell you a little bit about the exhibition before we launch into the program this evening. The exhibition and the accompanying catalog showcase new research on the remarkable achievements, influence, and legacy of a really important avant-garde artist and designer. From the beginning, it was always our intention to approach Sonia Delaunay's life and work from fresh vantage points. We honor, obviously, the canonical works from the 19 teens and 20s, but it was also really important for us to expand the scope of our inquiry into her underexplored areas of production, and in particular, the post-war career that really has not received a whole lot of scholarly attention. Sonia Delaunay's work in costume design fits into the former category and has long been celebrated. For her, designing costumes enabled a creative freedom that was perhaps gave her a little bit more leeway than her fashion designs, given the commercial imperative of her fashion. Some of her more radical costume designs were those made for the avant-garde, and in particular, sort of artist soirees, private events. And these include the costumes that she conceived for the 1923 performance of Tristan Tzara's Le Coeur à Gaz, which is obviously the subject of tonight's lecture. Our program this evening is the culmination of an independent study research project that was initiated by Sydney Maresca and supervised by Andrew Kircher, BGC Director of Public Humanities and Research. This project wholly integrates the academic and exhibition sides of our institution and underscores the very, very special type of learning that we do here at BGC. I would say one that particularly values interdisciplinarity and collaboration, which I think you will see in evidence here tonight. And now a bit about our speaker. Sydney Maresca is a clothing and textile historian with a background in clothing construction, textile crafts, and costume design. Her work has been seen in the Broadway premieres of The Cottage, directed by Jason Alexander, The Lightning Thief, and the award-winning play Hand to God. She is a visiting professor of theater at Williams College and has held full-time faculty positions at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts and Marymount Manhattan College. Sydney just completed her master's degree here at Bard Graduate Center and also holds an MFA from NYU's Tisch Department of Design for Stage and Film and a BA from Sarah Lawrence College. Please welcome Sydney to the podium.
Thank you, Laura. Oh my gosh, you guys, it's happening. I want to say thank you to Laura and Valeria, the curators of this incredible exhibition, to Andrew Kircher for helping me with this project, to Jason and Nadia and everyone on the Public Humanities team, also researcher Noah Dubé, and to May Rado and Deborah Crone and all of the faculty at BGC who made this project possible. Yes. And Williams College for the additional support, and to John Christensen and his team of incredible makers. The 1923 production of Tristan Tzara's The Gas Heart featured actors in costumes designed by the artist Sonia Delaunay. It was part of an evening of Dadaist performance. Eric Satie was there playing piano. Hans Richter and Man Ray showed films. George Auric played while Lizica Codreanu danced. The show famously ended in a riot, which the journalist Gilbert Charles declared the death of Dada in a brutal article published the following day. The crowd was unruly as soon as the evening began, and when the gas heart started after the second intermission, there was shouting and insults. Tzara's former friends rushed the stage, trying to disrupt the performance. Charles reported a tangle of bodies first on the stage and then spilling out into the audience. One man ripped off his jacket so he could fight better. People were being punched, kicked, whacked with canes and broken chairs. The actors could barely escape because they were wearing cardboard costumes, and one actor had his arm broken by Andre Breton, who came at him with a cane. The exploding footlights sounded like gunshots. The police were called. But despite making headlines, this performance is not well documented, and the only evidence that survives of Sonia Delaunay's costumes are 2 photographs and a handful of renderings painted by Sonia, which were also published in the 1977 art edition of the play. And there's some gorgeous giant pages of it in the gallery if you want to see that in real life. Still, the influence of these costumes is noteworthy, continuing to appear in textbooks, theater histories, and pop culture. So we reconstructed 2 of the costumes from the performance, and I'm going to talk about those costumes and their history and our reconstruction, and then we're going to look at the costumes on performers and see what happens.
And we have the riot.
What's your name? You're in charge. All right, so this guy's in charge of the riot. When it comes, grab your chairs. Don't do that or they won't let me back. So David Bowie commissioned a recreation of one of Sonia Delaunay's costumes in collaboration with designer Mark Rovitz at Brooks Van Horn in New York, and he wore this in his 1979 performance on Saturday Night Live. Bowie's reconstruction focused on volume and shape rather than flatness, and he used contemporary materials like vinyl and foam, which, while conveying the volume, were significantly less rigid. In this version of the suit, modern materials butt up against traditional materials. The shiny vinyl sits next to the white piqué waistcoat, a more traditional fabric that suggests Bowie was thinking of this as formal evening wear. Some of the modern materials have not aged well, and conservators have actually had to replace the internal foam, which rotted when the suit was exhibited in 2012. This interpretation seems to be thinking about Delaunay's strong graphic shapes and volume in relationship to the body. The angular shoulder, the tightly nipped waist, the garment wraps over the shoulder, the hips are encased in a peplum-like cone. And even with this dimensionality, Bowie's body and movement were significantly restricted. He was unable to walk in the skirt-like trousers, and his singers, Klaus, Nomi, and Joey Arias, had to carry him onto the stage. Nomi, who appeared on Saturday Night Live with Bowie in that costume, performed his solo work in his own version of one of Delaunay's gas heart costumes. This is him on German television in 1982. His costume looks like it may be made also using vinyl and foam, though with the addition of spandex pants, he has significantly more movement. A 1981 version of the play in Montreal interpreted them as more three-dimensional costumes, and these seem like they're also using fabric over foam, maybe spandex, which would be a very high-tech material in 1981. The vest on the far left looks like he's almost wearing a pillow. These interpretations of the costumes have a circus-like quality and seem to offer the performers a full range of movement. But in contrast to some of those earlier reinterpretations, in this project, I'm particularly interested in flatness and thinking about how the costumes are engaging with flatness. Is it the kind of flatness evoked when someone wears a sexy lady apron or a novelty tux t-shirt? Or is it the kind of flatness that we think of with paper dolls? European costume designers in the early 20th century, including Sonia Delaunay, faced a challenging question when putting their abstract designs on the stage. What happens when a flat, graphic, modernist garment design is forced to interact with the needs of three-dimensional human bodies in performance? And how did Sonia in particular approach this challenge? What is the relationship between a design sketch and a costumed body? How does the material specificity of the costumes and their construction affect the performers' bodies? And how might that have influenced the movement and the physicality of the performance itself? How can we activate the challenges and opportunities in studying ephemeral performance design when we no longer have access to either the performance or the objects? I've been designing costumes professionally for over 2 decades. It's not my first time trying to make costumes out of paper. I put paper suits on Theo Bleckman at the Whitney in the late 90s. I come from the world of downtown theater. I've designed shows off Broadway and on Broadway, most recently The Cottage. Somebody over there saw it. Yes, thanks for coming. So I approach these questions as a designer, as a maker, and as a thinker. I'm looking at archival materials, historical context, dramaturgical interpretation, and historical reconstruction. And I consider this project to be a contribution to the field of critical costume studies. While costume design for live performance is a crucial component to both the creative team's storytelling and an audience's understanding of the piece, the work itself remains ephemeral, consisting of a collection of garments on bodies in space perceived over the duration of a performance. It may be impossible to fully read a costume design without experiencing the performance itself. Sitting at the intersection of performance studies, dress history, and material culture, critical costume studies is an actively developing field. Aoife Monk's The Actor in Costume was published in 2010. The journal Studies in Costume and Performance was founded in 2016. Donatella Barbieri's Costume and Performance was published in 2017. This field is just incredibly new. It's only 2024. That's 14 years since Aoife Monk's book. I've been designing costumes for performance since 1998. This field literally did not exist when I started designing. Practicing designers and makers are making significant contributions to the field, including costume designers Jenny Tiramani and Deborah Landis. Much of critical costume scholarship produced earlier in the 20th century is tied up in thinking about scenography as a whole, often citing the works of designers Adolph Appia and Edward Gordon Craig, who left behind a number of texts illuminating the design thinking that went into their work for the stage. Both Appia and Craig were designers in the English or European sense that they were designing both the scenery and the costumes, though historians have tended to focus on their scenic design work, treating costume design as an accessory to the scenography. Throughout the 19th and into the early 20th century, actors were often expected to provide their own costumes. Michelle Major's Staging Fashion offers case studies of 3 actresses and their costume practices in late 19th and early 20th centuries. And Annie Holt looks at 19th century relationships between stage performers and their costume makers. Holt cites the early 20th century as a time when costume design finally has emerged as something that she would call modern, which she connects with costumes participating in the visual dramaturgy of the piece to help evoke meaning, character, and story. She ends her history of costume design in the year 1920, a point which she identifies costume's modern job, to make an argument about the play itself, or to say that the way that we learned in design school, design is dramaturgy. In the United States, Annie Holt's end date of 1920 coincides with an important development in the American theater-making process, the Actors' Equity Strike of 1919. So the strike shut down Broadway theaters for months. One of the results of the strike was the addition of a clause to contracts that declared that actors were no longer responsible for providing or paying for their own clothes. Under the new contract, costumes became an expense that the producers were required to cover, and as a result of this change, the look of the costumes went from being each individual actor's responsibility to being the responsibility of a single person hired by the producers, that is, the costume designer. Although there were many productions with costumes that were designed before the equity strike, the conclusion of the strike in September 1919 marked the turning point where costume designer became a functional job on Broadway and in the American theater. And so no wonder the field is so new. At least in the American theater, the professional practice of costume design is basically just over 100 years old. significantly younger than scenic design, which has practicing professionals dating back hundreds or thousands of years. While at the same time, in Europe, the job of designing costumes often continued to be done by the same person who was designing sets, and this is still true, which allowed the overall scenography to overshadow the costume thinking that was going into the design for the performance. Cardboard. Late 19th and early 20th century experimental theater faced a problem of abstraction when it came to putting decidedly not abstract human bodies in performance. One solution for flattening the dimensional human form came through dressing bodies in cardboard. Italian futurists were actively experimenting with cardboard costumes. Jerry's Ubu Raw featured a performer wearing a cardboard horse head. Clavel and De Pero's used board-based marionettes in their 1918 plastic dances, and so did Prampolini and Casavola in their 1927 Merchant of Hearts. That's what this is. You can see the actors and their cardboard collaborators. De Pero's colors starred only 4 cardboard objects and no humans, moved by strings in an empty blue space. Russian futurists picked up the theme, and Maleevich's costumes for the 1913 opera Victory Over the Sun featured painted cardboard costumes that resembled armor. Pablo Picasso's designs for the 1917 Ballet Russe production of Cocteau's Parade included cardboard costumes that transformed the performers' bodies into 3-dimensional cubist sculptures. And this is the Ballet Russe. They have costume budgets. Picasso is not using cardboard because it's cheap. He's using it for its material qualities. It's architectural, it's rigid, easy to cut and construct into cubist shapes, and it's an accessible commercial material that speaks to modernity in a way that parallels the use of typewriters and sirens as instruments in the piece. And it's flat. Hugo Ball, on the other hand, might have been using cardboard because it was cheap. The Dadaist recorded notes in his journal about the costume he wore for the performance of his sound poem at Cabaret Voltaire in 1916, made entirely of cardboard. It significantly impacted his ability to move or speak. I mean, imagine. Scholar Melissa Trimmingham discusses costumes that transform the human body, and she calls it sculpted costume. Trimmingham uses thick speculation in conversation with Ball's description of the event to imagine what it might have felt like for him to try to perform inside of this cardboard creation. But as she notes, it's just pure speculation. But we don't have to just speculate. We can experience it. We could recreate the costume and see what happens. Through the use of historical reconstruction, we have the opportunity to attempt to move from speculation into experimental research by recreating and attempting to perform in these kinds of historic, sculpted cardboard costumes. Sonia and Robert Delaunay moved to Paris in 1921 and were part of the community of avant-garde émigré artists, including Dadaists and Surrealist poets. Sonia remained friends with Tristan Tzara, the author of The Gas Heart, throughout their lives. Before The Gas Heart, Delaunay explored flatness on performing bodies in her 1918 designs for the Ballet Russe's Cleopatra. Cleopatra was designed to be viewed frontally with the performer's head turned sharply to the left to evoke the illustration style that was found on the walls of ancient Egyptian tombs. The costume features concentric circles over the bust that create the illusion of bare breasts and strongly graphic lines over the torso and skirt. The costume includes a mirror just above the costume's waist. If you want more Cleopatra, you can go visit the huge portrait of Chernacheva in the Cleopatra costume up the street at the gallery right now, and take a look at Valeria Dorogova's chapter on Cleopatra in the exhibition catalog. Sonia designed the costumes for a charity event organized by the Union of Russian Artists at the Hotel Claridge in 1924. The costumes are intended to depict fashions of the future, and the cardboard construction of the menswear seems very similar to the designs for the Gas Heart. In her design for Lizica Codreanu as Pierrot Claire in the 1926 film The Le Petit Périgot, Sonia Delaunay rotated flatness onto a horizontal plane, reinterpreting Pierrot's traditional clown ruff as a series of concentric circles around Codreanu's neck. And Lizica Codreanu, by the way, also performed at the 1923 Cora Barb evening and may have participated in the Gas Heart as a dancer. The trend for these rigid, movement-restricting costumes in modern theater was happening concurrently with the rapid, radical shift towards freedom of movement in clothes and fashion. The silhouette was shifting, restrictive corsets fell out of fashion for women in favor of softer undergarments that allowed bodies to move more freely, and sportswear was being worn by both men and women. Sonia's work as a textile designer, as a dress and textiles designer, was an important contribution to this shifting silhouette for women. Many of these dresses are also rectangles on bodies, but the effect is different when it's rendered in silk or wool instead of cardboard. Going back to the Hotel Claridge costumes, the cardboard menswear looks like comedy, but the women's wear actually does look like a very chic anticipation of the 1920s silhouette. It really is a fashion of the future. So in 1923, there's an old-timiness being evoked with Sonia Delaunay's costumes, both in terms of silhouette and rigidity. Her corseted torso and floor-length gown and his formal morning suit, we think it's a morning suit, evoke recently out-of-fashion dress practices. Did restriction mean something different in a world where street clothes were suddenly significantly less restrictive and more modern, but that people still carried the embodied memory of not being able to bend at the waist in their clothes? With characters named after disembodied parts of the face, eye, mouth, nose, ear, eyebrow, the text of the Gas Heart is seemingly an explosion of non sequitur language, but within the assault of disconnected declarations are statements of loneliness, longing, and embodied physical desire. What does it mean in the play for characters to be expressing statements of bodily desire when their fleshy bodies have been replaced with nostalgic, flat, geometric abstractions? Tristan Tzara's stage directions at the beginning of the script declare, "This is the one and only greatest scam of the century in 3 acts. It will amuse only industrialized imbeciles who believe in the existence of geniuses. Performers are requested to give this work the same attention as they would give a masterpiece on the order of Macbeth or Chanticleer." And I think this is important because Tzara is giving some cultural context for the costume thinking in this piece. So let me add some visual context. A masterpiece on the order of Macbeth. And here is a late 19th or early 20th century Macbeth wearing a pseudo-historical costume full of detail and texture and standing in front of a realistically painted scenic drop. Or Chanticleer, a play starring an actor in a fully feathered, human-sized rooster costume. This is Maud Adams in a publicity photo for the 1911 Broadway production of Chanticleer. They really spent their budget on feathers. So to give this work the same attention as they would give a masterpiece on the order of Macbeth or Chanticleer, but to treat the author, who is not a genius, with little respect, and to note the lack of seriousness of the text, which does not bring anything new to the technique of theater. End quote. From the photos, the costumes look rigid, frontal, and serve to abstract the bodies of the performers. They're in stark contrast to the expressionistic and detailed costumes traditional theatergoers of the time might have come to expect. René Crevel was invited to the Delaunay's apartment for rehearsal, and when he got there, he described Sonia Delaunay just finishing the designs. He said they were very simple and that they were not made of scraps, but were, quote, born under the pencil, composed, definitive. They were certainly costumes that resembled as little as possible all those that had been imagined up until then, end quote. Thank you, Noah. These costumes are declaring themselves modern, and if we believe Tzara's declaration, they are intended to provoke the audience. In this project, I'm looking to the practice of historical recreation inspired by practitioners of experimental archaeology and dress history. I use a methodology based on research, modeling, and activation. Research includes image and text-based research, and for these costumes, the research is really the photographs and the painted renderings. Modeling or working out includes sketch-based modeling, material sampling, and experimental execution of drafts. Theater makers have this type of modeling built into the costume making process, which often includes construction of a muslin mock-up for fitting on the actor before the final garments are built. Activation will include putting the reconstructed costumes on bodies in performance to see what questions arise. And this is happening tonight. It hasn't happened yet. Here we go. So, research. We'll get there. We need like a few more minutes. According to the program, Sonia Delaunay costumed 2 of the evening's pieces, a dance performed by Lizica Codreanu and The Gas Heart with scenery by Sidersky and costumes by Sonia Delaunay Turk with Victor Barth and Iliazd. The awareness of costume as a cardboard material permeates the text, and there is a direct reference to bodies being made of cardboard. Ear declares in the middle of Act 2, "My lung is made of lungs and not cardboard, if you must know." 2 photographs survive of the 1923 costumes. Kandinsky's photo shows Jacqueline Chaumont as mouth and Renee Crevel as eye. The performers are standing side by side with their bodies facing the audience and their heads tilted towards each other. Man Ray's photograph shows Crevel as eye in the center with 2 other performers staged left and right. And due to the abstractness of their costumes, it's not clear which characters these other 2 performers are playing: nose, ear, neck, or eyebrow. If you ask me, the guy on the left looks a little bit like a nose, but that's just a wild guess. In these pictures, they seem to be set in the theater. But when were these photos taken? Were they taken during the performance? Because if so, this seems like a very calm riot. At a rehearsal before the performance, at a photo shoot staged on the set. There are a number of Delaunay's paintings that are credited as being costume designs for the Gas Heart, though many of them are undated, and it's not clear if she made them as part of the costume design process for the 1923 production or at a later date. So when were these images made? What was their purpose? Were they for working out ideas, planning, a communication tool? Were they made after the costumes? Were they a record of the event? Were they a further execution of the ideas that showed up on stage? One of the challenges in thinking about historic costume design is how to read and understand historic costumes. Often researchers have to rely on sketches, still photographs, surviving garments, or documentary texts. While it can be tempting to read a designer's rendering as a literal representation of the garment as worn, a costume sketch is not the art. It is a communication tool between a designer and their collaborators. In costume design, the art is what happens on stage. Among the renderings are 3 different versions of the costume for Mouth, each with different sleeves, skirt patterning, and color stories. The design drawings for Mouth differ slightly from the costume Jacqueline Chaumont is wearing in the Kandinsky photograph. Most notably, all 3 drawings of the character show a dress with sleeves, while the photograph clearly shows a sleeveless costume. There are 2 different versions of Eye that are slightly different from each other, though both versions are in black and white and show a top hat and a suit with striped trousers and a long striped necktie. The drawings are relatively faithful representations of the costume that appear on Crevel in both photographs, with the exception of the diamond or hourglass shapes on the hat, a migrating waistcoat, and the 2 white slashes near the waist on the costume in the photograph. None of the other costumes from her renderings appear in the photographs, and the other performers' costumes in the photographs don't seem to have any visual relationship to the drawings. One of the realities of costume design is that sometimes there are just not the resources to get the design as sketched on stage. An important part of the art is how a designer navigates the circumstances of their resources. Modeling. Because of the qualities of the photographs, the amount of costume information we can extract from these images is limited. As a tool for close looking and a first step in modeling or working out what's going on with the clothes, I blew up the photos and traced them onto paper by hand. This allowed me to get into the details with my hands and pencil that were hard to figure out when I was just using my eyes, and some interesting things were revealed. The two unidentified characters are wearing similar costumes, each with top hats that look like they're made of paper or board, and flat graphic boards covering the fronts and backs of their torsos that are decorated with geometric shapes. They're both wearing what looks to be party-colored dance tights, leather dress shoes, and they may be wearing shirts, coats, and ties under their boards. On each of the performers, a rope or string is visible on one or both of their shoulders that looks like it is connecting the board on their front with the board on their back. They're wearing sandwich boards as costumes. And having identified sandwich board as part of the costume vocabulary for this piece, and a tool that Sonia Delaunay was using to evoke flatness, we can investigate the materiality of sandwich boards. The choice of sandwich board as a mode of mounting flatness onto a body, is one which 20th century audiences would have been familiar with. The sandwich board is a garment they would have associated with protest and advertisement. And I want to show you 10 more images, but I'm not going to. And if anyone who wants to see sandwich board images, see me later. Looking back at the costumes for Mouth and Eye through the lens of sandwich board, you can see on Eye the jacket edge at his hips. You can see the front and the back of it sort of encasing his body. The shoulder line looks straight across and has one dip cut out for the neck. And the shoulder looks angular with the sleeve cap. It looks like it's sitting below the point of the shoulder. And this seems like the same sandwich board model that the other two performers were using, and it's painted probably with a waistcoat and a necktie. He's wearing what looks to be an actual top hat, not a cardboard one, and with elongated diamonds applied to it, striped trousers made of cloth, as evidenced by their wrinkles and drape, and I think fabric sleeves, looks like fabric. Mouth has a straight neckline sitting below the clavicle, and her torso looks like a board with fabric applied to it. It's stiff and sitting away from her body. There are wrinkles on the bodice. We can't see the back, but it would make sense if she had a back in the same way that Eye does, and it would help balance the weight of the costume on her body. Her skirt looks like it has a stiff board panel in the front with soft fabric sides, and following the drag lines of the material, it looks like they're probably attached to the rigid board at that seam line. When thinking about color for these costumes, the black and white photos weren't much help, so I looked to Sonia Delaunay's illustrations. Eye seems to be dressed in black and white in what might be referencing a morning suit, except with a hip-length jacket instead of a cutaway. And Sonia Delaunay's renderings offer a couple of color options for Mouth: yellow, black, and white, or orange, green, beige, and white. For this project, we decided to go with the orange and green version because it seemed to align more closely with the color values in the black and white photo. But the photo is black and white, so we're really just guessing. In the middle of the construction process, we looked back at the photos, and it seemed like the color value of the two circles, and possibly also the darker shapes on the wave shapes on the skirt, which we were making green based on that Sonia's painting, seemed like they were all kind of the same color value, while the sides of the skirt seemed to be much darker. So we took a left turn and made those side triangles also green and the side panels of the skirt black, which is what you'll see on the costumes today. They don't match my painting. Here are Jojo and Taylor holding samples that the costume shop made to explore the materials and techniques. We looked at paint directly on cardboard, painted fabric, and different versions of paint effects. We liked this version for the top of the dress with fabric mounted to the cardboard because we thought that it would help get the wrinkled effect that we were seeing in the photo. Except in this draft, the cardboard is only mounted behind the orange shape, and we decided we could get closer to the flatness effect if the whole bodice was mounted on cardboard instead of just the orange part. And the costume shop wants me to make sure that I let you know that when you see the costume and you see the wrinkles on it, that those wrinkles were put there on purpose using the photo as a reference, and that they are very good at gluing and could have glued it perfectly if that was what we wanted. You can also see the wrinkles, prominent wrinkling in the 1924 costumes where it looks like fabric or paper was also applied to board. This 1913 vest made by Sonia seems like it might be engaging in a similar kind of thinking, fabric applied to a structure, in this case, an existing vest, creating a graphic effect. Looking at the side of the vest, which you can visit in the BGC gallery at 18 West 86th, it looks like it was made by a traditional menswear manufacturer when you look at the vest back, and that Sonia patchworked pieces of brightly colored silks and wools onto the front of it. And if you look closely at the side seam, which you can kind of see in this picture, but if you go to the gallery, you can really see a little bit of the original white linen of the vest front that she covered with patchwork peeking out from underneath the hand stitching. This is Brooklyn, the craft artist who's standing in for our actor in this fitting. And seeing it on the body, the bust circles needed to be much bigger, so Taylor is making the adjustment. We considered doing I's suit painted directly onto the cardboard, but using mid-20th century sign painting vocabulary, because we weren't seeing the same kind of wrinkles in the photograph on the suit. But ultimately, we decided that we decided to use the same technique we were using for the dress, fabric mounted onto cardboard and then painted, so that the two costumes would feel like they were living in the same world materially. Taylor is making some corrections to the lines on the tie because I made a mistake. And in the drawing, I didn't thoroughly erase it, and they read the tie as being outlined, whereas I think that actually Sonia was using the stripes of the tie to create the optical illusion of an outline, so we erased the outline. Thank you. After the costumes, look at that, no outline. After the costumes were revised and adjusted, we brought in the actors for fittings, and here John Christensen is adjusting the sleeve attachment on Kim. Here is Jamie, trying out how she can move in the cardboard box that we dressed her in. This is not my baby that I'm holding in the picture, though I am a mother. My kid's 7 years old, and I should have thanked him at the beginning. Thank you, Atlas, for your contributions to my research. Sonia's son, when she was designing the gas heart, would have been 12, about, give or take. I made a conscious choice at the beginning of this project to try to make it a welcoming space for parenting, particularly for mothers. We're humans. Some of us have children that we care for, and this is part of the embodied experience. And if we're doing work that includes thinking about embodiment, we should not willfully exclude this kind of embodiment for the sake of seeming more professional or whatever. Everyone in this photo is a mother except for the baby. The baby is Betty Jane. She belongs to Jamie, the actor playing Mouth. She's 6 months old in this picture and was invited to attend fittings and rehearsals in whatever way was useful for Jamie. She was here earlier today. She may be here now. This is the photo I would use if I was more worried about feeling professional, which I usually am. Baby, what baby? It's just 3 very smart women who are very professional talking about clothes. I know we're decades beyond excluding women from research because of gender, but the thing about having women in the room, and not just women, but parents, and keeping the door open for the things that come with motherhood as part of the research process, is that the second that we got Jamie in the costume, this happened. Betty Jane went straight for the green circles. And I note that these bust circles seem like an echo of Sonia's design for Cleopatra. 1,000 adult philosophers can speculate about the symbolic meaning of the graphic circles in Sonia Delaunay's costume designs, but they won't tell us as much as one baby can. She was not interested in any of the rest of the costume, and Betty Jane could not get enough of the green boobs. It is probably a response to the simultaneous color effect of the strong contrasting colors, the vibrating next to each other, and to the shapes, and probably to something mama-like about the image. And so, activation. Let's take a look at these costumes. They're here. Turn around and let's see what happens when we try to put 2-dimensional designs on 3-dimensional bodies in performance.
statues, jewels, grills, and the wind open to mathematical allusions. Cigar, button, nose. He was in love with a stenographer. Eyes replaced by motionless belly buttons. Monsieur OMG was an excellent journalist, rigid and aquatic. A dead bonjour floated in the air. What a sad season.
The conversation has become boring. N'est-ce pas?
Yes, n'est-ce pas?
Very boring. N'est-ce pas?
Yes, n'est-ce pas?
Naturally. N'est-ce pas?
Yes, n'est-ce pas?
Boring. N'est-ce pas?
Evidently, n'est-ce pas?
Very boring. N'est-ce pas?
Yes, n'est-ce pas?
Evidently. N'est-ce pas?
Yes, n'est-ce pas?
Very boring. N'est-ce pas?
Evidently, n'est-ce pas?
Naturally. N'est-ce pas?
Yes, n'est-ce pas?
Evidently. OMG.
Jamie, Kim. So you're having to perform frontally with a very specific physicality. Can you talk about what you're doing with your bodies?
I am constantly orienting myself to the front and reminding myself that is all I have.
It's kind of like you're wearing a paper doll costume and you have to become the parts of the arms that move and legs.
Okay, Act 2.
I have won lots of money. I swim in the tub. I have goldfish necklaces. I have an American hairdo.
Deja vu. I've seen it in New York.
I don't understand the talk of the coming war, and I am growing thinner every day. A young man followed me on a bicycle. I am leaving this coming Monday.
In Act 3, there's a stage direction that says, "I falls to the floor." Kim, do you think you can do that?
No, I cannot.
Okay, what should we do?
Well, I have to pretend as if I'm falling to the floor. And in this case, I tear a page from Javert's Suicide in Les Mis. And it looks something like this to me in my mind and body. But I can only get to here.
By the end of the play, Mouth has transformed into a racehorse, or perhaps she has been a racehorse the whole time. The stage direction says that Mouth enters crawling on all fours. Jamie, can you do that?
No.
Okay, what should we do?
Me!
Transformed. There's a movement moment written into Act 3, the dance of the gentleman who falls from a funnel in the ceiling onto the table. We don't have any documentation of what the costumes were for the dance, but let's imagine it happened in cardboard costumes. The dance is an opportunity to see the costumes in motion, breaking the illusion of their frontalness and activating them in terms of unflatness. The 1923 performance ended with a riot. Stay in your seats. With the performers stuck trying to exit the stage in their cardboard costumes. Jamie and Kim, can you try to exit the stage like there's a riot?
Wrong door!
So in 1923, these costumes were declaring their modernness. They were sleek, graphic, and engaged with a material, cardboard, that was part of the avant-garde vocabulary for costume design in this period. They were born under the pencil, a demonstration of Sonia Delaunay's journey from page to stage, from two-dimensional renderings to three-dimensional bodies in performance, which speaks to her later work as a clothing and textiles designer. The costumes evoke imagery of old-timiness and gendered formality, and the brightly colored shapes on Mouth's costume have the power to unlock a visceral response to its abstracted femininity. And they're funny. Did you laugh? Yeah. Were you amused? Because Tristan Tzara just called you an industrialized imbecile. The costumes are driving the physicality of the play, placing severe restrictions on how the performers can use their bodies and relate to each other on stage. They demand a flat frontal performance or the illusion falls apart. Sonia Delaunay's designs contributed significantly to the meaning of the piece. The bodily alienation enforced by the costume is doing important dramaturgical work. In a play full of abstract and seemingly meaningless text, where the speakers are alienated from any meanings that might be carried by their words, the performers are also alienated from any meanings that they might be able to convey with their bodies. It is just impossible for them to actually connect. The costumes, both as rendered in her illustrations and as demonstrated in the photographs of the performers, tell us that there are two worlds in this play. The world of eye and mouth, a human couple in their more fully realized flat representations of a dress and suit, and the abstract world of nose, ear, neck, and eyebrow in their sandwich board costumes decorated in geometric shapes. Delaunay's costumes offer a key to untangling Tzara's puzzle of a text. And amid the barrage of disconnected language, I would argue that Tzara embedded a story of two characters blistered by tragedy, desperate to connect and trying to find love. Tzara's rivals may have arrived at the performance that evening in 1923 looking for a fight, but the characters on stage in Sonia Delaunay's costumes made of cardboard and cloth were looking for love. And, as the play declares at the end, in the face of unsurmountable linguistic and bodily abstraction, they find it. Fin. The end. Love. Thank you. And now we have time for questions.
Any questions?
Andrew Oprah Kircher is walking around with a microphone.
I really miss being around to ask the first question. Sydney, it was amazing. And it's really fun to see the reconstruction like this and see all of it sort of happening in one place and whatever this was, 45 minutes. I'm just curious, especially seeing the costumes in motion. I thought a lot about Oscar Schlemmer's triadic ballet from the Bauhaus. And I wonder if there's any documented connections, if
they are all looking at each other's work. I think the answer is yes. I'm not an expert on Bauhaus, but I think yes, and yes. And the people who are better at dance will talk about Laban and say better things than I will, but they're all in dialogue with each other about these kind of approaches to bodily abstraction and how you're putting them on stage.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Sydney. I'm so glad that this worked out. It was fantastic. So, do you know why the riot happened?
I do. It is because André Breton led a rowdy group of surrealists who wanted to declare that Dada was garbage and how dare Tristan Tzara put on a Dada event, and they were itching for a fight from the beginning. It was. There's a question up here in the front.
Thank you. Just kind of thinking about how these geometric shapes are used in some ballets, right after these eras, but on the total opposite kind of material that is like lycra.
Yeah.
I think a little bit about like Willa Kim.
Yes.
And I guess they were looking at these kinds of things and transforming them into, the opposite kind of fabric that was part of the body that moved with the body.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think you're onto something interesting in that, like, in the 1920s, they're looking at cardboard as a material that they're pulling from the industrial world and putting on stage. Mm-hmm. And in the 70s and 80s, pulling vinyl and lycra from the industrial world or the bathing suit world or the sports world and putting that on stage is kind of a similar journey to taking like a not traditional fabric and doing something wild with it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Bob. Thank you, Sydney. That was so fabulous. My question's kind of in two parts. The one is, I'm actually not too familiar with what Dada is, so would you mind speaking a bit more on that? I know that's probably a huge question.
Oh my God.
But that being said, when you're speaking about like exaggerated form, it really made me think of camp and Susan Sontag's kind of conception of camp. And I wondered, if you can tell me what Dada is, what do you understand in relation between camp and Dada?
Oh God, that's Bob. You're gonna have to write that paper. It's so good.
Okay, yeah.
Oh my God. I think this counts as camp, don't you think? To rewind a little about Dada, it's an early 20th century European art movement. They have written so many manifestos. They want to tell you exactly about what it is, but it is an anti-art, and they're angry at the world and expressing that through art. And it's like, why does this text make no sense? Why are the costumes impossible to move in? Because they're saying F you to the world. The world is meaningless. What are we doing? That's like a real thumbnail. I could use, someone will correct me a lot about how I've described Dada. They want to shock people. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, Duchamp, Man Ray is hanging out with them. And if you think about it, like they just got through a war, they just got through a global pandemic. Technology, especially information technology, is moving faster than their brains have ever comprehended. And I think there's a lot of parallels to the way we're experiencing our current moment.
My first impression of your performers were amazing, was kind of like a cartoon that came alive.
Yeah, great observation.
And I'm just wondering what you might think about that. Because I did a little quick data research because I said, okay, of course, Mickey Mouse, but that was like 1928, so a little later. But
right, because they didn't actually quite have the technology to make cartoons quite yet, but it's like on the cusp. I think that's a really interesting connection that you're making.
Hi, Sydney. Thank you so much for sharing this really interesting research in such a delightful way. I'm really interested in what you were bringing up in reference to the sandwich boards and something that would be tied so heavily to protest wear and advertisement in such a concrete format. And I'm wondering if you think that reference is a little bit in conflict with kind of a Dadaist abstract mentality, or if you think that the intentionality of that design would be intended for the audience to be picking up on in this context.
What a thoughtful question. I mean, I think protest, like Dadaist, Dada is a protest. The art is supposed to make you angry. If you enjoy it, Tzara thinks you're an idiot. He's wrong. It's very enjoyable. But also the commercialism, I think we're seeing that in, if you think about like a ready-made, in the surrealists and the Dadaists, of taking these quotidian commercial objects and images and putting them and elevating them into a high art realm like the theater or a museum. So I think it's really in line with what they're thinking. And now you have to write that paper.
Any other? Okay, hi, thank you for this. It was great. I've been thinking about staging this play for 30 years.
You have? Oh
we'll see what I
God.
do.
Yes, please.
Since the costumes, like with the paintings, Delaunay's paintings, we don't know if they come before, during, or after.
Right.
And we're certainly coming after. So I love the reconstruction and the working with them. But when you talk about the dance of the gentleman, I can't help but think of the typography.
Yes.
And I'm really curious about the publication, the first publication.
Right.
To my understanding, Tzara oversaw, so he was very involved in that. Do you find yourself thinking perhaps the costuming through subsequent typography? Is there a connection in there?
I cut my choreography typography slide for time. But so in the 1921 print of the play, or I think it was maybe 1922, but there was a typography text that was basically like rows of nonsense letters. And then in the later printing after the 1923 performance, it's a series of Ys and Vs and shapes that you could really make with your body. And some scholars have connected that with actually Tzara looking at the choreography and then trying to recreate it in typography. Someone who is a better choreographer than me can interpret that. And Jessie, who is working with our movement on this, would also love to talk to you later about her thoughts about the typography. And some of our hand gestures that are in the piece were being driven by that. It's tricky to decode typography into dance. Why? Yes. It's all wise.
Thank you. Laban notation. Did it exist in 1920? And if it did, was this piece registered in Laban notation?
Jessie is telling me yes to the first question and no to the second question.
That I know of.
It is that is
so Laban existed, but this piece was not registered.
Was in dialogue performancely, artistically with this community, but I don't know that this was I don't. My guess would be that this would not be the kind of performance that would have merited that notation.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. I am thinking, so I'm an early film scholar, just like to.
Ooh, it's the period. Yes.
Yes. So I am curious because I've seen her films, when the films that she has costumed for, and it's the opposite of this. They're highly fluid.
Yeah.
Their materials are very like vaporous, and it's all about having almost the excess of movement and almost seeming like the self is disappearing into the clothing, because often the people in the films that she costumed for are under enormous turmoil and transformation. So it seems to be the opposite of this rigidity. So I'm thinking, if you've thought about the connections of her as a film costume designer and theater as a different art. And I'm also thinking, if you've thought that so much of this kind of work seems connected to German expressionism, where it was all about having painterly backgrounds that were highly exaggerated in form, quite geometric, but it was the idea that the stable backdrop, the rigidity of the backdrop was being undercut by these arabesques. And while here it's happening in the body, and the rigidity is in the body through the costumes.
Right. I think like that second part of that thought is really getting at the history of design for stage and film, which is concurrent. But that in the late 19th and earliest 20th century, there's a real shift in scenic design away from a backdrop and into space, platforms, ladders, dimensionality, activating that, and that then the bodies in that space are creating the movement. Let's talk later. I got more thoughts on that.
I have a question. Were they aware of what was going on in the early Soviet Union?
Yes.
And how did the work of biomechanics, Meyerhold, Popova, all those designs that were going on there, which seem in their own way similar, except that they were trying to make sense? What's the relationship?
Well, Sonia Delaunay was born in Ukraine and educated in St. Petersburg. So her community is these Russian emigres in Paris.
But what about what was going on in Moscow at that time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Mayakovsky painted the poem on the door of their apartment. They're very much in conversation with these artists.
So do you see a connection between, do you know Popova's designs for Meyerhold?
Yeah.
You know, moving windmills and costumes. Do you see any direct connection between the two?
I see direct visual connection, but I haven't researched if there's a historical connection or not. But I know that, her background is coming from what became the Soviet Union. So for sure, she has that connection.
Well, please join me in thanking Sydney Maresca.
Thank you.